Did you know that most Canadians have no idea that new laws passed in the last few years could affect their bank accounts, their online speech, and even their ability to move freely, all without them ever breaking a law? Here's the shocking part. Many of these changes didn't come with loud announcements or national debates. They happened quietly, buried in policy updates, while everyday people stayed focused on work, bills, and survival. What if a comment you post today could be judged illegal tomorrow? What if access to your own money could be paused, flagged, or restricted without warning? This isn't fear-mongering. These are real laws already in place that affect millions of Canadians right now. And the most unsettling truth? Most people won't realize how powerful these laws are until they're personally affected. So the question is simple.
Number 10. Digital ID and centralized identification systems. Let's start with the most far-reaching and controversial change of all, the push toward a digital ID system in Canada. On the surface, it sounds harmless, even convenient. A single digital identity that lets you access banking, government services, travel, and even online platforms with just a few clicks. No more paperwork, no more waiting in lines. Simple, right? But here's where things get unsettling. A centralized digital ID doesn't just identify you, it can also control access. If your digital identity becomes the key to essential services, then whoever controls that system holds enormous power. Banking, healthcare access, employment verification, travel permissions, all potentially tied to one digital profile. Supporters argue this improves security and reduces fraud. Critics warn it creates a single point of failure. If your digital ID is suspended, restricted, or flagged, even by mistake, your ability to function in everyday life could be instantly limited. No account access, no services, no appeal process that works fast enough. Think about how often systems already fail. Glitches happen. Data gets flagged incorrectly. Now imagine that error affecting your entire identity, not just one account. What makes this law especially powerful is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It rolls out slowly, service by service, until opting out becomes nearly impossible. Convenience becomes dependency. So ask yourself this.
Number 9. Education and parental rights changes. One of the most quietly impactful legal shifts in Canada is happening inside schools, where new education policies are reshaping how decisions are made and who gets a say. On paper, these changes are designed to modernize education, promote inclusion, and standardize learning across provinces. But for many families, the reality feels far more complicated. Recent policy updates have reduced parental involvement in certain school decisions, especially around curriculum content, student support services, and disclosure requirements. In some cases, parents are no longer automatically informed about sensitive changes involving their own children. Supporters argue this protects student privacy. Critics argue it weakens family authority and trust between schools and parents. What makes this law especially concerning is how subtle the changes are. There's no single headline that says parents lose rights. Instead, authority shifts slowly, policy by policy, guideline by guideline, until families realize their role has changed. By then, reversing course becomes extremely difficult. Even if you don't have children, this still affects you. Education shapes future workers, voters, and leaders. When transparency decreases, accountability often follows. A system that limits parental oversight also limits community input, and that can have long-term consequences for society as a whole. Imagine discovering after the fact that key decisions were made without your knowledge, not out of neglect, but by design. That sense of exclusion is what many families are now experiencing. The real concern isn't disagreement over values, it's the growing gap between those making decisions and those most affected by them. When education becomes less collaborative and more centralized, the question isn't just what children are being taught, it's who gets to decide and who doesn't. Number 8. Health and Medical Decision Authority. Another major legal shift that has raised serious concern involves healthcare decision-making and how much authority individuals and families truly have during medical situations. In recent years, Canada has expanded regulations that give institutions and government bodies a greater role in determining medical access, treatment eligibility, and decision-making authority, especially during public health events. At first glance, these rules are meant to protect public safety and ensure consistent care, but in practice, they can reduce personal choice at the very moments when choice matters most. Families have reported situations where caregivers or relatives felt sidelined, while decisions were made by policies rather than people who know the patient best. When consent becomes a procedural checkbox instead of a personal conversation, trust begins to erode. What makes this especially troubling is how quickly authority can shift. During health emergencies, regulations can override normal standards, limiting second opinions or alternative care options. Even individuals who are fully capable of making decisions may find their options narrowed by rules designed for the greater good. The balance between collective safety and individual autonomy becomes fragile. This law doesn't just affect patients, it affects families, caregivers, and even medical professionals. Doctors and nurses may feel constrained by compliance requirements, forced to follow directives even when they believe another approach would better serve the patient. That pressure can strain the very foundation of healthcare, which relies on judgment, ethics, and human connection. The most unsettling part is how quickly these changes can be. You don't feel them until you're already in a hospital room, under stress, needing clarity, and discovering that your voice carries less weight than you expected. In moments of vulnerability, the question becomes painfully clear. Who truly controls medical decisions? You or the system? Number 7. Workplace and employment compliance rules. The way Canadians work is changing rapidly, and new employment compliance laws are quietly reshaping the balance between workers, employers, and the government. These rules are often introduced as protections designed to ensure fairness, safety, and accountability in the workplace. But for many people, they also introduce complexity, uncertainty, and unintended consequences. Recent updates have expanded reporting requirements, classification rules, and compliance standards, especially for remote workers, independent contractors, and small businesses. What used to be simple agreements are now wrapped in layers of documentation and legal definitions. A freelancer who once enjoyed flexibility may suddenly be reclassified, taxed differently, or required to follow regulations meant for large corporations. For small business owners, the pressure can be overwhelming. Compliance errors, even unintentional ones, can lead to fines, audits, or legal disputes. Many employers say they spend more time navigating paperwork than actually growing their business or supporting their employees. In response, some companies choose automation or downsizing, reducing opportunities instead of expanding them. Workers aren't immune either. Increased regulation can limit flexibility, restrict side income, or discourage employers from hiring altogether. What's meant to provide security can sometimes result in fewer choices. Remote work, once seen as a breakthrough for work-life balance, now comes with new monitoring and oversight expectations that blur the line between professional and personal life. What makes this shift especially impactful is that most people don't realize they're affected until something goes wrong: a contract dispute, a tax issue, or a sudden change in employment status.
The workplace becomes less about performance and more about compliance. And when rules grow faster than understanding, both workers and employers are left navigating a system that feels increasingly rigid, confusing, and out of touch with real-world work.
Number 6. Housing, rent, and property regulations. Housing in Canada has always been a sensitive topic, but recent changes in housing and property laws have made it even more complicated for both renters and property owners. On the surface, these laws are meant to protect tenants, stabilize rents, and prevent unfair evictions. However, the reality is far more nuanced, and the effects ripple through entire communities, impacting housing availability, affordability, and ownership rights. New regulations have expanded rent control measures, strengthened eviction restrictions, and increased oversight on how landlords manage their properties. While these changes aim to prevent exploitation, they also create significant challenges for landlords. Many feel constrained in how they can maintain, upgrade, or even rent out their properties. This can discourage investment in housing, slowing the development of new units at a time when demand continues to grow. For renters, these laws offer some protection, but the benefits aren't always straightforward. Renters may find certain rights improved, but the trade-off can be fewer housing options, delays in property maintenance, or stricter screening processes as landlords try to minimize risk under stricter regulations. In other words, protections in theory sometimes create new barriers in practice. Homeowners and developers also face uncertainty. Renovation projects, expansions, or new constructions often require navigating a complex web of compliance rules, approvals, and oversight. The result is slower development and, in some cases, higher costs, which can ultimately be passed on to tenants or buyers. The most concerning aspect is how subtle and incremental these changes are. No single law dramatically transforms the housing market, but layered regulations over time can significantly reduce flexibility, choice, and control for everyone involved. Both renters and property owners are learning the hard way that even well-intentioned laws can carry unintended consequences, shaping how Canadians live, invest, and plan for the future.
Number 5. Self-defense and personal safety laws. Canada's self-defense and personal safety laws have seen important updates in recent years, and for many Canadians, the changes are both confusing and concerning. On paper, these laws are intended to clarify when and how individuals can protect themselves in dangerous situations, but the practical reality often feels much less clear, leaving many people uncertain about what is truly legal and what could land them in serious trouble. The key issue lies in the definition of reasonable force. While most people assume that protecting themselves or their property is always permitted, the law sets strict boundaries. Using more force than the court considers reasonable, even in a situation where someone is genuinely threatened, can result in criminal charges. For many, this creates a chilling effect, where the fear of legal repercussions outweighs instinctive reactions to danger. The impact of these laws is not just theoretical. Imagine a situation where a homeowner confronts an intruder, a person intervenes during a violent altercation in public, or someone uses force to defend a loved one. Even if their actions prevent harm, the question of legality is determined after the fact, in a courtroom, rather than in the moment of danger. That uncertainty can be frightening and stressful, especially when personal safety is at stake. Moreover, these changes have implications for everyday life. From carrying protective devices like pepper spray to knowing how to act in emergencies, Canadians now must navigate a complex legal landscape to avoid unintentionally breaking the law. What was once instinctive, defending oneself or others, now requires careful consideration of legal boundaries.
As a result, many people feel less confident in their ability to protect themselves, and the very laws meant to define safety can leave them questioning whether.
Number 4. Expanded emergency powers. Canada has recently expanded the government's emergency powers, granting authorities greater control during declared crises. On the surface, this might sound reasonable. After all, emergencies require fast action to protect public safety. But the reality is far more complex, and many Canadians may not fully understand how these powers could affect their daily lives. Under these new regulations, the government can implement measures that temporarily override existing laws, restrict movement, control business operations, and limit public gatherings. While these powers are intended for situations like natural disasters or public health crises, the definitions of what qualifies as an emergency are surprisingly broad. This ambiguity leaves room for interpretation and expansion, sometimes without clear limits or timelines. What makes these laws particularly concerning is how quickly they can take effect and how slowly oversight often occurs. Measures introduced during an emergency can remain in place long after the immediate threat has passed. In practice, a law intended to address a short-term crisis can become a long-term authority tool, changing how people interact with public spaces, businesses, and even each other. The effects are subtle but tangible. Canadians could experience travel restrictions, altered work schedules, and new compliance requirements almost overnight. Small businesses might find themselves forced to adapt to sudden operational rules, while ordinary citizens may need to navigate shifting guidelines that affect their freedom of movement. Even when intended to protect, emergency powers can create a sense of uncertainty and tension, leaving people unsure of what they can or cannot do. The bigger picture is clear. While emergency powers are framed as protective measures, they also demonstrate just how much control the state can exert during moments of uncertainty. In these situations, the line between safety and overreach becomes dangerously thin, and everyday life can feel less predictable and more restricted. Number 3. Cashless economy and financial monitoring. Canada is steadily moving toward a cashless economy, and with it, new laws are increasing the government's ability to monitor financial transactions. At first glance, these changes might seem convenient or even helpful, reducing fraud, making payments faster, and streamlining services. But for millions of Canadians, the reality is far more complex, raising concerns about privacy, control, and financial independence. Under the new rules, banks and financial institutions are required to report more transactions and monitor unusual activity more closely. While the intention is to catch illegal activity, this increased oversight also means that your personal spending habits, online purchases, and even small transfers could be scrutinized. What used to be private, buying a gift, sending money to a friend, or making small business transactions, can now be tracked and flagged automatically. The shift toward digital payments also reduces the option of using cash, which historically allowed for anonymity and control over personal finances. When every transaction leaves a digital trail, access to money becomes more dependent on compliance with banking systems. Mistakes, glitches, or flagged accounts could mean frozen funds, delayed payments, or difficulties in accessing essential services, all with little warning. For freelancers, gig workers, and small business owners, these changes can be particularly impactful. Transactions can be questioned or delayed, cash flow can be disrupted, and operational flexibility decreases. Even ordinary citizens may face inconveniences that feel out of proportion to the benefits. What makes this shift especially concerning is how subtle it is. There's no single law that forces everyone into a cashless system overnight.
Instead, layer by layer, the tools for monitoring and control expand, quietly altering the way Canadians interact with their money and increasing dependency on a system that tracks almost everything. The move toward a cashless economy may be convenient, but it also brings new vulnerabilities and risks that few are prepared for.
Number 2. Expanded government surveillance powers. In recent years, Canada has quietly expanded the government's ability to monitor citizens, and these changes have far-reaching implications for privacy, freedom, and daily life. On paper, the laws are justified as measures to protect public safety, prevent crime, and enhance national security. But in practice, they significantly increase the government's access to personal data, often without the public fully realizing the scope of the surveillance. Under these new regulations, authorities can collect, store, and analyze information from a wide range of sources, including online activity, phone communications, and location tracking. Even devices we rely on every day, like smartphones, computers, and smart home systems, could potentially be tapped for data. What's particularly concerning is how broad the definitions are, giving officials significant discretion in determining which situations justify surveillance. For the average Canadian, this means that much of what we do online, from browsing websites to posting on social media, leaves a digital trail that could be accessed without a warrant in some circumstances. Even casual or harmless activity could be monitored or flagged. The boundaries between public safety and intrusion become increasingly blurry, leaving individuals vulnerable to scrutiny they may not even be aware of. The consequences are subtle but pervasive. Privacy becomes harder to maintain, and personal information is no longer entirely under our control. Decisions we make about what to say online, where to go, or how to communicate can carry legal or administrative consequences, even if no crime is committed. What makes this law especially unsettling is its quiet expansion. Many Canadians will only realize the impact after their data is monitored, flagged, or used in ways they did not expect. In a society that values freedom and autonomy, increased surveillance introduces an invisible but powerful control, fundamentally changing the balance between citizens and the state.
Number 1. Online content and digital speech regulation. The first law we need to discuss is one of the most immediate and visible changes in Canada, the regulation of online content and digital speech. As social media, blogs, and digital platforms have become central to how people communicate, Canada has introduced laws aimed at controlling what can be posted, shared, or discussed online. While these rules are framed as protections against misinformation, hate speech, and harmful content, they also carry significant implications for freedom of expression and everyday communication. Under these laws, platforms are now required to monitor user-generated content and remove material deemed inappropriate or dangerous. But the definitions of what counts as harmful are often vague and open to interpretation, leaving ordinary users uncertain about what is allowed. This means that a comment, meme, or opinion that seems harmless today could potentially be flagged or removed tomorrow, and in some cases, users could face penalties for violating unclear rules. The impact reaches beyond large platforms. Everyday Canadians, from students to small business owners, influencers, and casual social media users, are all affected. Posting reviews, sharing news articles, or expressing political opinions online now carries a level of risk and uncertainty that didn't exist before. People are being forced to self-censor, often without realizing it, in order to avoid potential consequences. What makes this law particularly concerning is how quietly it has expanded. Most people are unaware of the legal boundaries until they encounter them firsthand. Online speech, once considered a personal and relatively safe space, is increasingly governed by rules that are enforced by both government oversight and platform policies. The result is a subtle but powerful shift in how Canadians communicate, think, and express themselves.
one that raises serious questions about freedom, control, and digital rights in everyday life. These 10 new laws in Canada aren't just abstract rules. They have real, tangible impacts on your privacy, safety, finances, and freedom. From digital IDs to online speech regulation, from emergency powers to housing and healthcare changes, these policies quietly shape how Canadians live every day. Staying informed is the first step to protecting yourself and your family. If this video opened your eyes, like it. Subscribe for more updates on laws that affect your life, and comment below which law concerns you the most. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe.